Euphoria Season 3. Ending explained Rue's death, Bishop's betrayal, and the Devil's Kiss didn't just end, it detonated. And the fallout from what happened in that final episode is still sitting heavy on the chest of everyone who watched it. Rue Bennett, the girl who narrated her own chaos for 3 seasons, the girl who survived overdoses and heartbreak and the kind of pain that most people will never understand, didn't go out in a blaze of glory. She didn't get a dramatic final scene where the world stopped turning for her. She slipped away on a couch quietly, the way most people leave this world. And that right there is what makes it so devastating. Then there's Alamo, the devil dressed in designer clothes, who handed out poison with a kiss on the forehead and genuinely believed that nobody around him would ever have the courage to turn on him. He was wrong. Bishop, the quietest man in the room, the one nobody was watching, had been loading the gun for this moment for a long time. And when it finally went off, it changed everything. This is Euphoria Season 3. Episode 8, the ending explained, the biggest questions answered, and every single detail broken down. Spoilers are coming, so if you haven't watched it yet, you already know what to do. Rue's death. The Devil's Kiss and the forbidden fruit. There are deaths on television that feel earned. There are deaths that feel shocking. And then there are deaths that feel true. Rue's death falls into that third category, and that is exactly why it hits so differently from anything else this show has ever done. Before we even get to the moment itself, we need to go back to Faye, because that's where the chain of events really begins. Faye screaming, alerting Wayne, managing to escape from Laura's place, and taking all of the ID cards with her when she left. That one act set everything into motion. When she returned, Alamo was waiting for her, and something was immediately off. The version of Alamo that greeted her wasn't the cold, calculating, terrifying man we had come to know across this entire season. He was warm. He was generous. He told her she was a good employee. He told her she deserved a week off. He said he would cover all of her medical bills, and then he kissed her on the head. That kiss on the head, that one small gesture that in any other context might have felt tender or even fatherly, but in that moment, in that room, with everything we knew about who Alamo really was, it felt like something else entirely. It felt like the kiss of death. It felt like the moment in a story where the villain has already made his decision and is simply going through the motions of being human before following through on it. And that's exactly what it was. Alamo had already decided that Faye was a liability. He had already decided that she was a rat, that she knew too much, that she had become more of a problem than she was worth, and so he handed her a bottle of pills. Pills for her pain, he said. Pills laced with a high dosage of fentanyl. She didn't even need to take the whole bottle. Just a couple was enough. Just a couple, and it was over. This is where the symbolism of this season reaches its most powerful point, because what Alamo did to Faye, and ultimately what connected back to Rue, was not just a murder, it was the story of the forbidden fruit all over again. The devil didn't drag Eve to the garden and force the fruit into her hands. He smiled, he was charming, he made her feel seen and valued and special. And then he deceived her into taking the very thing that would bring about her destruction. That is Alamo in this scene, down to every single detail. The warmth, the generosity, the kiss on the head, the bottle of pills handed over like a gift. It was all designed to deceive. It was all the devil doing what the devil has always done best. Now, while all of this was happening on one side of the story, Rue was recovering at Ali's place. And there was something genuinely beautiful about those scenes, something that felt like a breath of fresh air in a season that had been suffocating in its darkness. Ali has functioned throughout this season as the symbolic counterweight to Alamo. Where Alamo was the dark, Ali was the light. Where Alamo represented destruction and manipulation and greed, Ali represented honesty and care and the kind of stubborn goodness that refuses to give up on people even when they've given up on themselves. Rue staying with him while she got back on her feet felt right. It felt like she was finally in a safe place. The light shining through the window in Ollie's bedroom when we first saw that scene felt intentional and loaded with meaning. It felt like the show was telling us that Rue's life was beginning to change, that the sun was finally rising on a version of her story that might actually lead somewhere good. She had been through so much, she had survived so much, and in that moment, with that light coming through the window and Allie nearby, it genuinely felt like maybe she was gonna be okay. And then the hallucination began. Rue believed she saw on the news that Fez had escaped from prison. She remembered the conversation they had at the very beginning of the season, the phone call that felt so full of hope, where she said she'd meet him at a specific spot if he ever got out. So she went. She went to that spot full of hope and anticipation and the kind of nervous excitement that comes with the belief that something good is finally about to happen. But Fez wasn't there. Because it wasn't real, none of it was real, and when that realization hit, we saw Rue do what Rue has always done when the world disappoints her. She went home. She went to her childhood home, to her mother, to the place where she was most herself before everything went wrong. Her mother was reading the Bible when she arrived, and it was here in this quiet domestic scene that felt almost normal that the show began pulling back the curtain on what was actually happening. Brief glimpses, small moments of reality cutting through the dream, because Rue wasn't at her childhood home. Rue wasn't anywhere. Rue was on the couch at Allie's, and she was dying. The hallucination was her mind's final act of mercy toward itself. It was her brain creating a world where she could say goodbye without knowing she was saying goodbye. Her mother holding the Bible, reaching out her hand, pulling Rue into a hug. That wasn't just a memory. That was an angel coming to collect her. That was the universe offering her something she had been searching for across 3 entire seasons of this show. Peace. Just peace. No more running, no more pain, no more trying to find a version of herself that she could live with, just her mother's arms and the quiet and the light. And then the scene cut back. The exact same shot of Allie waking up with the sun coming through his bedroom window. The day beginning again. Except this time, it wasn't the start of a hallucination. This time, it was real. This time, when Allie walked out into the living room and found Rue on the couch, she was already gone. She had slipped away in the night, quietly, without drama, without a big final speech or a slow motion sequence or a musical crescendo designed to tell you how to feel. She was just gone. And that is the thing about Rue's death that I think is going to stay with people for a very long time. Because, yes, you could argue that it was underwhelming. You could argue that for a character who has been at the center of this show since the very first frame, she deserves something bigger, something more cinematic, something that matched the scale of who she was. But that argument misses the entire point. Rue's death wasn't supposed to be cinematic. It was supposed to be true. And the truth is that most people who lose their lives to addiction don't go out in dramatic fashion. They go out exactly the way Rue did, on a couch, in the night, found in the morning by someone who loved them. That is the reality of what fentanyl does, what Alamo's industry does, what the machine that this entire season has been exposing actually does to real human beings. Levinson wasn't making a dramatic television moment with Rue's death. He was making a statement. He was holding up a mirror and refusing to let the audience look away. There was something else in those final moments too. Rue had been listening to the Bible as she fell asleep. She had found faith on this journey, even if she never found the reinvention she was looking for. She went looking for a new version of herself and instead found religion, found something to believe in, found a kind of quiet comfort that she hadn't had before. And maybe that was enough. Maybe in those final hours with Ave Maria playing softly underneath the scene as if the show already knew what was coming before we did, Rue had found something close to peace. Her name had ended up in the book of death that Ollie kept, the one she had once pointed to and said with absolute certainty that she would never be in. She was wrong, but she wasn't alone when she left. And somehow, in a season full of darkness, that feels like the most important thing of all. There is a box that Alamo kept, not a safe full of money, not a drawer full of weapons, a box with a snake inside it, And the reason he kept that snake, the reason he looked at it, the reason it sat there in his world as this quiet and constant presence was to remind himself of the most important lesson he had ever learned in his life. That no matter how well you think you know the people around you, no matter how long they have been by your side, no matter how much loyalty they have shown you over the years, you never truly know what someone is capable of until the moment arrives where they have to make a choice. Alamo knew this. He had learned it the hard way. He had watched his own mother betray Preston. He had seen what betrayal looked like up close, what it cost, what it felt like when someone you trusted completely turned out to be the very thing you should have been protecting yourself from all along. He kept that snake to remember, and then slowly over time, surrounded by money and power and the intoxicating belief that he was untouchable, he forgot. He forgot the lesson, he forgot the snake, and that forgetting is what killed him. To understand why Bishop did what he did in that final confrontation, you have to go all the way back and look at who Bishop actually was compared to everyone else in Alamo's orbit. Because Bishop was never like the others. He was never loud, he was never flashy, he didn't wave money around like it was a personality, he didn't have a big ego that needed constant feeding, he wasn't interested in the women, wasn't interested in the lifestyle, wasn't drunk on the power the way that so many of the people around Alamo were. While everyone else in that world was reveling in what they had, Bishop was simply present, watching, thinking, existing in that space without ever truly belonging to it. And that difference, that quiet separateness that he carried with him everywhere was the thing that should have made Alamo suspicious from the very beginning. Instead, it made Alamo trust him more, because Bishop seemed reliable. Bishop seemed steady. Bishop was the man who didn't make noise, who didn't cause problems, who showed up and did what needed to be done without making it about himself. In a world full of volatile personalities and unpredictable behavior, Bishop looked like the safest bet in the room. But safety and loyalty are not the same thing. And Alamo, blinded by everything else that was happening around him, never stopped to examine the difference. Think about the small details that were scattered across this season, like breadcrumbs leading directly to this moment. Bishop telling Maddy that he was full of surprises, the poodle instead of the Doberman. These weren't throwaway character quirks, they were signals, they were the show quietly, consistently placing Bishop on the opposite side of the line from everyone who surrounded Alamo. The Doberman is aggression, it is dominance, it is the kind of energy that Alamo's world ran on. The poodle is something else entirely. It is the thing that doesn't fit in that world. It is Bishop himself, a man who was cold, yes, who was capable of darkness, absolutely, but who fundamentally operated from a different set of values than the people he worked alongside. And that fundamental difference is what made the betrayal not just possible, but inevitable. Now, there is another layer to this that I think is just as important as everything else, and it comes down to survival. Because, yes, Bishop may have had his own moral code that clashed with Alamo's way of operating. Yes, he may have found the murder of Rue to be a line that he was not willing to cross, or at least not willing to let go unpunished, but there was also something deeply practical underneath his decision. Bishop was not naive. He had watched what happened to everyone around Alamo across the course of this season. He had watched as people were wiped out, as others fled, as the circle around Alamo got smaller and smaller with every episode that passed, and Bishop was smart enough to do the math. When you are the last person standing in a room with a man like Alamo, you are not in a position of safety. You are in a position of extreme danger, because a man like Alamo, a man who trusts nobody, a man who views every person in his life as either an asset or a liability, does not keep people around once they stop being useful. And with the operation collapsing around him, with the DEA closing in, with Fagon and Lore being surrounded by authorities, Bishop would have known with absolute certainty that his days as an asset were numbered. He was going to become a liability. And Alamo's solution for liabilities was always the same. Bishop saw it coming, and so he moved first. This is why the decision to remove the ammunition from Alamo's weapon was so deliberate, so calculated, so perfectly timed. It wasn't a spontaneous act of revenge. It wasn't an emotional reaction to something that happened in the moment. It was a plan Bishop had thought this through. He had decided that the only way out of that life, the only exit that didn't involve him ending up in the ground or behind bars, was to take Alamo down before Alamo took him down. And he chose Ali as the instrument to do it, not because he had any deep loyalty to Ali, not because he was suddenly a reformed man with a conscience, but because Ali walking into that club with 3 bullets and nothing to lose was the perfect cover for what Bishop had already decided needed to happen. The Western showdown that Alamo called for in that final confrontation was so perfectly him, so completely in line with everything we had come to understand about who Alamo was. He was theatrical, he was a showman. He believed in the performance of power as much as he believed in power itself. A champagne bottle falling from a bar as the signal to draw. It was cinematic, it was dramatic. It was exactly the kind of moment that Alamo would have written for himself if he had been the one writing the story. But he wasn't the one writing the story anymore. Bishop was, and Alamo didn't even know it. When Alamo drew his weapon before the bottle even hit the ground, it was one final act of deception, one last reminder of who he was at his core. He didn't play by the rules he set. He never had. He made rules for other people to follow while he broke them whenever it suited him. That was the devil's way. That was always the devil's way. He told everyone in the room that when the bottle shattered, they could draw. And then he drew early, fully intending to cut Ollie down before he even had a chance, except the gun didn't fire because there were no bullets, because Bishop had already made his choice long before that champagne bottle ever left Alamo's hand. And Ali, standing there in that club with the weight of Rue's death on his shoulders and 3 bullets left in his weapon, used them. He made sure with the final one, just as Alamo had noted, he had those 3 remaining shots. And then it was done. Alamo was gone. The devil was dead. But let's sit with Ollie for a moment here, because his journey to that club and what drove him through that door is something that deserves its own examination. Ollie had spent so much of his life and so much of this season trying to view addiction as a disease, trying to approach the world with empathy, trying to understand that the people who were destroying lives from the supply side were also human beings, were also in pain, were also trying to survive in a world that hadn't given them many options. That was a generous and thoughtful way of looking at things. But Rue's death broke something in him. It cracked the framework through which he had been viewing the world and left something rawer and simpler and more ancient in its place. Because when you watch someone you love die because a man decided that her life was worth less than his continued operation, the philosophical distance between supply and demand collapses, it stops being a systemic issue and becomes something personal, something moral, something that comes down to the oldest question in human history. Are people good or are people evil? And Ali's answer, the answer he arrived at after finding Rue gone on that couch, after holding the fentanyl test kit that confirmed what had been in those pills, was that the disease wasn't addiction. The disease was people. The real disease was the existence of those who would look at a human being and decide that her life was an acceptable casualty of their business. Ali said it himself. The real disease stems from people at their core, from the fact that people are either good or evil, and the real problem is that nobody wants to acknowledge that distinction anymore. Everyone wants nuance, everyone wants context, everyone wants to understand the circumstances that led someone to become who they are, and Ali had been one of those people for a long time. But there are moments in life where nuance becomes a luxury you can no longer afford, where the weight of what has happened makes complexity feel like a betrayal of the people you have lost. Ali reached that moment when he found Rue, and so he walked into Alamo's club not as a man seeking justice through the system or resolution through conversation, but as a man who had decided that there was a right and a wrong in this world, and that no amount of context or circumstance changed which side Alamo was on. He simply wanted to find a better way of being of service. And this was it. The story of Alamo and Bishop and Ali converging in that final showdown is ultimately a story about the oldest war there is. Good versus evil. Light versus dark. The thing that has existed since before any of us were here and will continue long after we are gone, Alamo was never just a drug dealer. He was never just a crime boss. He was a symbol of everything that preys on nobody was watching, had been loading the gun for this moment for a long time. And when it finally went off, it changed everything. This is Euphoria Season 3. Episode 8, the ending explained, the biggest questions answered, and every single detail broken down. Spoilers are coming, so if you haven't watched it yet, you already know what to do. Rue's death. The Devil's Kiss and the Forbidden Fruit. There are deaths on television that feel